In the premiere of Loki Season 2, we see Loki experiencing a phenomenon known as time slipping. As opposed to Loki slipping in and out of separate universes, or timelines, he is traveling back and forth along the same timeline, as evidenced by Loki being able to influence the future within the TVA itself. Loki not only causes a great deal of damage when he flies the hovercar through the window where Casey is buffing the floor, but that damage remains after Loki time slips back into the future. Loki crashing through that window caused damage to the floor that has yet to be repaired when Loki returns to the present. Moreover, Loki actually gives Ouroboros the nickname OB when he time slips into the past and talks with Ouroboros, and influences the future even further, as Loki instructs and waits for Ouroboros to build a temporal aura extractor to fix Loki's time slipping problem. It's a bit of a mind bender, but this also demonstrates the bootstrap or grandfather paradox, as Loki had to be time slipping in the first place in order for him to travel to the past, in order to fix his time slipping. The time slipping in the Season 2 premiere serves as a point of conflict in the story, yet it also serves as the solution. It's a snake eating its own tail. It's an Ouroboros. If Loki wasn't time slipping, we likely would not have gotten access to the temporal loom as quickly, and we would likely not have met Ouroboros as quickly either. Loki time slipping is what gets the ball rolling for the events of this season, and in episode 4 we see Loki close that original loop caused by his time slipping when he prunes himself. Again, meaning that Loki had to time slip so that he would prune himself and be in the correct location to find Sylvie and answer the phone call from OB. While this is all a bit confusing, just know that this season of Loki is showing us a series of looped events in time, such as Loki pruning himself, or Victor Timely and Ouroboros having been inspired by each other to write the TVA handbook, and that this will most definitely carry over into the final 2 episodes, as the mid-season trailer appears to imply Loki will make many more attempts at correcting his mistakes, by reliving the moments before the loom explodes over and over again. This also means we get to see Victor Timely become pasta a few more times, so that's going to be a hoot. Real quick though, if you're enjoying the video thus far, then consider subscribing to see more like it. Much appreciated. With some background established, I want to posit that Loki is now a being that is unstuck from time, a unique state of existence that few, if any other beings, can replicate. I believe that when Loki's time-slipping issue was solved in episode 1 of this season, he became an entity that is completely separated from the timeline, someone who is utterly displaced from time. This would fit in well with what I have theorized previously, that in some way or another, Loki will become or always was the original He Who Remains. If Loki is the only one who does not die or isn't returned to his home timeline as it appears happens with the other TVA members, then is he not factually the last one standing, He Who Remains? I believe Loki's time slipping will start back up again because he is unstuck from time, unable to return to his original timeline because his temporal aura had been removed from that timeline. As the TVA does not exist on a timeline as we have come to understand it, I believe this is why Loki can time slip into other people's lives, because Loki's temporal aura is now outside of the timelines and is no longer bound by the constraints of time and space. And because he is not bound by the constraints of time and space, he is hopping around to the lives of the people he was close to when the explosion happened in the TVA. In case this is difficult to understand, I'll break it down to make it slightly more digestible. While it's clear that the TVA members aside from Loki are variants taken from particular points in their lives from the timeline, those people still existed on those timelines in the first place. They lived their lives on the timeline up until either Loki or He Who Remains or somebody else took them and plopped them into the TVA. And while they would have disappeared, they did at one point exist on the timeline. They were born, they lived, they were taken. Now, I believe that Loki's situation is unique, as we have not actually seen any other characters pulled out of the timeline with a temporal aura extractor in the way that Loki was. When we've seen other variants taken from their timeline in the past, they simply follow the TVA hunters through the Tempad time doors, like we saw with Loki back in the Season 1 premiere. Now, however, Loki has had his temporal aura extracted from the timeline itself. I wonder if this means that the timeline Loki came from is now a timeline in which Loki never actually existed, as if his temporal aura was never a part of that history. This would align with Loki being the only one who is able to jump around on the timeline, or possibly even between timelines, as we don't really know what to expect out of these next 2 episodes, as his aura is displaced outside of time and space, unlike anyone else. Loki is literally He Who Remains in the sense that he was the last TVA member remaining, that didn't get sent back to his original timeline. The loom was destroyed, and Loki remained. Now, I will also echo a theory I have heard circulating around, which is that Victor Timely getting spaghettified is actually what seeds his temporal aura across the multiverse. I just don't personally understand as to why the multiversal war would not already be occurring if the TVA itself exists outside of time and space. And this could be due to the fact that the Kangs we see in Quantumania do not actually exist yet, and are created as a result of Victor Timely being spaghettified and having his temporal aura spread across the multiverse itself. And perhaps this even explains why the Kangs war with each other in the first place, because they each feel as though they are the true Kang, or he who remains. And technically, they all would be correct and have a claim to that title, as they are all the temporal aura of one Victor Timely. It's definitely far-fetched, though I think it would be thematically fitting for Kang to be someone who is spread across the timelines, and this is why he's so hard to stop, whereas Loki would be a character who exists wholly separate from the timelines. Whereas Loki could be stuck outside of time and space, Kang may be stuck within the multiverse as his aura has been spread across all timelines, and the multiversal war itself may be a loop of Kang variants attempting to take on the role of He Who Remains, a fight to see who the true Kang is. This may even tie into what happened to Kang in Quantumania, and perhaps somehow Kang being sucked into the multiversal engine and Victor Timely being spaghettified created the perfect conditions in which the temporal aura of Kang could be spread evenly across all possible timelines. So, while it's not much, I think that Loki is ultimately unstuck from time, whereas Kang is stuck in time, and that this too is an Ouroboros of sorts. So while it's not much, I think that Loki is ultimately unstuck from time, whereas Kang is stuck in time, and that this too is a representation of an Ouroboros, as Loki is only unstuck from time because of Kang, though Kang is only stuck in time because of Loki. If Kang does not create or operate the TVA, then Loki would never be taken by the TVA, and would never go on to recruit Victor Timely, and ultimately create the conditions in which the TVA can be created in the first place. My goodness though, this show is just getting so confusing. Though I will say it's still less confusing than what I have seen of that Netflix show Dark. So anyway though, aside from that, what's the point here? I think the point is that they have crafted Loki Season 2 to be an Ouroboros in almost every way they could, as so many events are so intricately interwoven that if almost any single event is changed, everything would fall apart. Loki had to time slip to help create the temporal aura extractor to stop his own time slipping. He had to be the one that pruned himself. And of course, the fact that OB and Victor Timely claim to have been inspired by one another, and that they each effectively wrote the TVA handbook. This is why defeating Kang will be so much more difficult than defeating Thanos, as everything related to Kang is in a time loop, meaning it's nearly impossible to identify the single point at which everything could be changed. What is needed to defeat Kang in the end is determining the absolute point that makes Kang who he is. Perhaps defeating him really is as simple as preventing Ravonna from placing the TVA handbook in the window of a young Victor Timely, though I highly doubt it. I still think we've got some major curveballs coming, and I could be wrong about everything.